I put none, which was true technically. Humans do not have architecture. We have habits, and habits, I have learned, do not show up on any form the Galactic Cooperative has ever designed. I found out I was non-combatant the same way I found out most things about myself, through a machine that did not know what to do with me. The processing terminal at Vethka Station was a tall, pale column of light, the kind that hums at a frequency just below what you can consciously hear, but just above what your spine can ignore. I had been standing in front of it for 4 minutes. The line behind me had stopped moving. I could feel the collective impatience of 6 different species pressing against the back of my neck like a hand. Species designation confirmed, the terminal said. Human, classification, non-combatant. Yes, I said. Biological threat index, 0.3. Sure. Processing anomaly detected. Please stand by. I stood by. I was good at standing by. I had spent 11 days standing by in a collapsed tunnel on core station with vacuum on one wall and silence on the other, and I had come out the other side with a PhD, a standing job offer from the Cooperative's Xenobotany division, and a very specific relationship with the concept of waiting. It does not scare me anymore. Waiting just means the next thing has not happened yet. The terminal hummed louder. Cortisol response pattern flagged as atypical for non-combatant classification. I blinked, meaning what? Your stress hormone spike in response to the ambient processing noise registers at 94th percentile for Vreth ambush posture pre-engagement. I looked at the terminal. The terminal looked back at me, or did whatever a column of light does that feels like looking. I grew up on a mining colony, I said. Loud noises meant cave-ins. Cave-ins meant you moved or you did not move anymore. My cortisol is just efficient. A long pause, the kind that means the system is running something it did not expect to run. Anomaly noted. Recommend further study. Non-combatant classification maintained. Please collect your badge from the dispensary to your left. The badge was lime green. It glowed softly in the dim corridor light, a gentle and cheerful beacon that announced to every species on Vethka Station that I was, officially, not a threat. I clipped it to my collar. The dispensary also handed me a welcome packet, a dietary supplement schedule, and a laminated card that read, in 7 languages, non-combatant personnel are not required to participate in conflict resolution protocols. I read that line 3 times. I was not sure whether to feel relieved or insulted. I decided to feel neither and went to find my quarters. Vethka Station was the kind of place that had been designed by committee across 3 star systems and showed it. The corridors in Sector A were wide and cool, built for the Vreth, who were broad and needed room for their 6 limbs and their dignity. The corridors in Sector C were narrow and warm, built for the Orvathi, who were small and did not believe in wasted space. The corridors in Sector B, where the non-combatants lived, were medium width, medium temperature, and decorated with motivational murals of various species standing together under various suns. Someone had added a human figure to one of the murals recently. I could tell because the paint was fresher, and the figure was holding what appeared to be a clipboard. My name was Priya Vasanthakumar. I was 24 years old. I had 3 published papers on the adaptive behavior of low-gravity root systems, a scar on my left shoulder from a pressure seal that failed at the worst possible time, and a sample case containing 6 months of xenobotanical specimens that I cared about more than most living things I had met. My posting was 6 months, xenobotany, greenhouse level 3rd rotation. The cooperative had a collection of botanical specimens from 37 worlds that needed cataloging, cross-referencing, and in several cases, convincing to stay alive in an artificial atmosphere. I was, according to my file, the best candidate for the job. I did not disagree. Plants were honest. They told you exactly what they needed and exactly what they would do if you gave it to them or failed to. They did not have opinions about your cortisol levels. My quarters were small and smelled like recycled air, and something faintly floral that I suspected was the cooperative's attempt at making non-combatants feel at ease. There was a narrow cot, a desk, a viewport that looked out onto the station's outer ring, and a shelf that someone had labeled in careful handwriting, "Personal items, maximum 4 kg." I put my sample case on the shelf first. Then I sat on the cot and looked at the badge. 0.3, the terminal had said, Biological Threat Index. I had looked up the scale in the welcome packet on the walk-over. Vreth scored between 8.4 and 9.1. Orvathi, who were small and fast and had venom glands, scored 6.7. The Drail, who looked like tall gray fog and communicated through subsonic vibration, scored 4.2, mostly on the basis that nobody entirely understood them. Humans, 0.3. The packet explained that the index measured things like claw density, bite force, venom potential, skeletal reinforcement, and territorial aggression wiring. It was a very thorough list. It did not measure what you learned to do with your body when the walls were closing in. It did not measure the particular kind of calm that settles into you after 11 days alone in the dark, when you have already had the conversation with yourself about whether you are going to make it and come out the other side of it still moving. It did not measure habits. I clipped the badge back on, turned off the light, and went to sleep. The first 3 days passed the way orientation days always do. Too much information delivered too fast by people who have said it so many times they have stopped believing any of it. I attended briefings on atmospheric safety, dietary compatibility, conflict resolution protocols, which, per my laminated card, I was not required to participate in, though nobody seemed to know what to do with that in practice, and a session on interspecies communication etiquette that spent 40 minutes explaining that you should not attempt to hum at a drail unless you were formally trained, because the undertones could mean anything from hello to I challenge your dominance depending on frequency. I took notes. Old mining colony habit. You write things down because the person who told you might not be there to ask again. On the 4th day, I found the greenhouse. It was on the station's lower ring, behind a set of pressure doors that required 3 different clearance scans. The cooperative took its botanical collection seriously, which I respected. Inside, the air was different, warmer, denser, carrying the particular weight of things that were alive and growing. Rows of specimen beds stretched under grow lights calibrated to 17 different solar spectrums. There were plants here that had never shared an atmosphere before. Some of them seemed to know it and were conducting themselves accordingly. I walked the rows slowly. My sample case was in my left hand. I was already making notes. This was the part I was good at. This was the part where my brain went quiet and useful at the same time, sorting and cataloging and asking the right questions of the right root systems. I had a gift for it. My doctoral advisor had said once, not a warm gift, but a precise one, like a very good knife. She had meant it as a compliment. I had chosen to take it as one. I spent 6 hours in the greenhouse on that first visit. When I came out, the corridor lights had shifted to the station's evening cycle, and there was a Vreth cadet standing in the corridor outside the pressure doors. He was enormous. They always were. Vreth cadets were engineered across 6 generations for military function, and it showed in every line of them, the breadth of the exoskeletal plating, the deliberate weight of each movement, the particular quality of their stillness that was not peace but readiness. He had 4 arms crossed over a chest built like a cargo bay door and was looking at something on a handheld screen. He did not look up as I came through the doors. I moved left to pass him. He moved right, still not looking up, just filling the corridor the way large things fill corridors, without intention, without awareness, with the absolute certainty of something that has never needed to check whether the space it was moving into was already occupied. I moved right. He moved left. I stopped. He kept walking and nearly walked through me, catching himself at the last moment with the automatic grace of a body built for spatial precision. He looked down. The screen disappeared into a pocket. He looked at me the way you look at something unexpected on a floor, not unkindly, but with the faint bewilderment of a category error. His eyes dropped to my badge. The green glow did its job. Non-combatant, he said, not cruel, not dismissive, just nomming a fact the way you name the furniture. Botanist, I said, also just nomming a fact. He walked past me. I watched him go and filed two things into the part of my brain that had been filing things since I was 16 years old and learning which tunnels were safe and which ones were not. 1. The Vreth cadets moved like they owned every corridor on the station. 2. They did not watch where non-combatants were. I did not know yet what I was going to do with that information. I went to the mess hall, ate something that approximated rice, and went to sleep thinking about root systems. The terminal's anomaly note sat in the cooperative's processing queue, filed, unread, waiting. I did not know about it then. But the station was already watching me in the only way that mattered, the way things watch you when they do not know they are watching. And I was watching back. The cadet's name was Sevrak. I found this out the same way I found out most things on Vethka Station, by listening to conversations I was not officially part of because non-combatants were, as a general rule, considered acoustically irrelevant. Sevrak was fourth-generation military caste, top of his cohort, 3 years ahead of schedule for his rank assessments. The other Vreth cadets talked about him the way the miners back home talked about the deep-bore equipment, with respect that had a little fear in it, the kind you do not admit to but carry around anyway. There were 4 of them in his unit. Sevrak, who was the largest, Drevin, who was the fastest, Kaeth, who was the one the others listened to when Sevrak was not speaking, and a 4th one whose name I never learned because in my experience of the next several weeks, he was always slightly behind the other 3, and I categorized him accordingly. They trained in the annex on the station's mid-ring, 2 sessions a day, 6 days out of 7. I knew their schedule because the annex was between my quarters and the greenhouse, and because paying attention to who moves where and when is not a skill you can turn off once you have had it drilled into your spine by 3 years of tunnels that rerouted without warning. I was not watching them. I was just aware of them, the way you are aware of heavy machinery operating nearby, not focused on it, but never entirely not tracking it. The rest of the station sorted itself into the grooves that stations always do, faster than you would expect. The Orvathi clustered in Sector C and did not particularly want company. The Drail communicated in subsonic and went largely uninterpreted. The other non-combatants, 2 Orvathi researchers, a Drail logistics coordinator, and a human named Oliver Grant who worked in atmospheric maintenance and had the particular 1,000-yard look of a man who had been explaining the same pipe system to new people for 6 years, occupied the mess hall's middle tables and conducted themselves with the careful pleasantness of people who were all aware they held the station's least prestigious designation. Oliver was the first person on the station who talked to me like a person. He was 40-something. Originally from a place called Gloucester that he described as cold, gray, and producing excellent fish, and a very specific type of resigned humor. He had been on Vethka for 3 years. He knew where every pipe ran, which atmospheric scrubbers were one shift from failing, and which meal cycles in the mess hall were worth attending, and which ones produced something the menu called protein aggregate that he advised avoiding on philosophical grounds. "You're the new botanist," he said. The first morning we ended up at the same table. "Yes. How are the plants?" "Complicated, interesting, better company than most things on this station so far." He looked at me over his cup, smiled like someone who recognized something. "Give it a week. The plants grow on you." He paused. "That was accidental, but I'm keeping it." I spent my days in the greenhouse. The specimen collection was in worse shape than the briefing documents had suggested. 3 of the low-pressure species were showing stress responses consistent with atmospheric fluctuation, and someone had cross-contaminated 2 of the soil beds in a way that was going to take careful work to undo. I was not bothered. Problems you can see are problems you can solve. I made charts. I made adjustment schedules. I talked to the plants in the particular low murmur I had developed in the colony tunnels when I needed to think, and the silence got too loud. Oliver stopped by the greenhouse on the 5th day, ostensibly to check a ventilation coupling near the eastern wall. Actually, I suspected, for the company. "They're responding well to you," he said, looking at a cluster of Herath vine that had, in the 3 days since my recalibration of its light cycle, extended 2 new growth nodes. "They're just following the conditions," I said. "I gave them what they needed. They did the rest." "That's all anyone can do." He looked at me sideways. "How are you finding the station otherwise, beyond the plants?" "It's fine. The Vreth cadets giving you trouble?" I looked up from my notes. Why would they? He shrugged, which was a very Oliver way of saying quite a lot. "They don't mean anything by it. It's more that they just don't account for us, really. Non-combatants. We're part of the station inventory in their heads, I think. Same category as the ventilation system." I thought about the corridor outside the greenhouse, Sevrak, and the badge and the category error in his eyes. "I noticed," I said. "Most people find it easier to just root around them, give them the space. It's not worth the trouble." I nodded. He was right. It was not worth the trouble. I believed that genuinely at the time. I went back to my notes. Oliver checked the coupling, said something quietly approving to the Herath vine, and left. The days settled into the kind of rhythm that long postings develop, not comfort exactly, but familiarity. Familiarity is its own kind of anchor. I knew which corridor intersections were crowded at shift change and adjusted my routes. I knew that the mess hall's 3rd meal cycle on alternating days produced something genuinely edible. I knew the greenhouse's morning light shift happened 3 minutes before the official schedule said it did, and I had started arriving 3 minutes early to watch the plants respond. I was, by any reasonable measure, doing well. And then on the 19th day, I cut through the annex. It was not a decision I had thought about. The primary corridor to the greenhouse was blocked, a maintenance crew running pressure tests on a section of the outer ring, which meant a detour of either 12 minutes up through Sector A or 4 minutes through the mid-ring annex. I had specimens that needed attention before the morning light shift. The math was straightforward. I had checked the annex schedule, or I thought I had. The terminal had shown no bookings for the morning block. What the terminal had not shown was the unofficial session, the one the Vreth cadets ran outside the formal schedule, the one that was not logged because it did not need to be, because the annex was theirs in every way that mattered, and logging it would have implied the possibility of it being otherwise. I came through the side entry with my sample case in my left hand and my notes in my right, and walked 4 steps into the room before I processed what I was seeing. They were already in motion, all 4 of them, running a contact drill in the center of the floor, moving with the controlled, organized energy of bodies that had been doing this since before they could remember. The sounds in the room were solid, weight, contact, redirection. It was, objectively, impressive. The kind of movement that reminded you why the Vreth scored between 8.4 and 9.1. I stopped. Drevin saw me first. He paused, then Kyath, then the 4th one. And then Sevrak. He did not pause. He just turned and looked at me, and the looking had a different quality from the corridor outside the greenhouse. That had been a category error. This was something else. This was a large and very capable thing deciding how to feel about an interruption. "Non-combatant," he said. Same word, different tone. "I apologize," I said. "The primary corridor is closed for maintenance. I was routing through." I kept my voice level. mining colony habit. You do not give a collapsing tunnel the satisfaction of hearing fear in you. I'll find another way. I turned toward the door I had come in through. The drill schedule is posted, Kyath said. He had a clipped, precise way of speaking, each word arriving exactly where it was aimed. Non-combatant personnel are advised to check listings. The listing showed the block as empty, I said. Unofficial sessions are not listed. A pause. Now you know. I had my hand on the door panel. 4 more seconds and I would be in the corridor, and this would be done. What is that? Drevin said. I looked back. He was looking at my sample case. Specimens, I said. Botanical, I work in the greenhouse. You carry them everywhere. They require consistent temperature management. Drevin said something in Vreth to Sevrak. I did not speak Vreth, but I had been on the station long enough to recognize the register. Low, amused, the verbal equivalent of a shrug that means something I will not translate directly. Sevrak crossed the floor toward me. He was not rushing. He was just closing distance, the way large things close distance, without urgency, because urgency implies the other thing might go somewhere. You should leave, he said. He reached out toward my arm, not rough, just indicating direction, the way you indicate direction to furniture that has appeared in the wrong place. My sample case was in his path. He was going to knock it. I thought the case. And then I stopped thinking and started routing. The geometry was not complicated. It never is, at the level my body operates at when it needs to. Sevrak's arm was moving at a downward angle toward my left. His weight was forward, loaded onto his front 2 limbs, the way Vreth cadets loaded forward when they were performing a redirect rather than expecting resistance. I had approximately 1.5 seconds before contact. I stepped left, not back left, which took me inside the arc of his reach rather than away from it. My right elbow came up as I moved, not as a strike but as a block, redirecting the forward motion rather than opposing it. His mass went where his momentum had already decided it was going, which was no longer toward me. He went down, not hard, just where the physics sent him. Drevin moved immediately, as cadets do when their unit leader goes down. He was fast. He was genuinely fast, but he was moving toward where I had been, and I was no longer there. The narrow space between his approach and Kyath's position behind him was exactly wide enough, and I was already through it before either of them had finished processing the first fall. Kyath was the interesting problem. Kyath had good instincts. He adjusted. He came at the angle that cut off the door, which was the correct tactical choice, and he was already recalculating as he moved. But recalculating takes a fraction of a second, and I was already committed to the route. Kyath went down on his outside knee when I changed his weight distribution. I did not entirely understand how I knew to do that. I had not thought about it. The tunnel had taught me, if it moves, you already know where it is going. You just have to be somewhere else and let the physics handle the rest. The 4th cadet, the one whose name I never learned, stopped. He was, as I noted, the smart one. I was at the door. My sample case was in my hand. I checked the latch on the case. The latch was fine. Nothing had shifted. I became aware that the room was very quiet. Sevrak was on the floor, not hurt, but the particular stillness of something that is recalculating its entire framework for understanding a situation. Drevin and Kyath were already getting up. The 4th cadet had not moved. I looked at the case again. Nothing spilled. I was furious about the case. I held on to that. It was clean and clear, and I knew what to do with it. The other thing, the cold, still, geometric place my brain had gone for 11 seconds, I did not look at directly. I opened the door. I'll use Sector A in the future, I said. I walked out into the corridor, turned left and continued to the greenhouse. The morning light shift was already starting. I was 30 seconds late. The Herath vine was extending its first growth response of the day, slow and deliberate, and entirely indifferent to what had just happened in the annex 4 corridors away. I sat down on my work stool. I put the sample case on the bench. I opened my notes. My hands were steady. They were always steady. The tunnels had done that too. I did not think about the annex. I thought about the vine. I wrote 3 paragraphs of observation notes in careful handwriting and did not once use the word suddenly, because things had not happened suddenly. They had happened in the only order they could have happened in, given the geometry. Oliver came by an hour later to check the ventilation coupling, which I was beginning to suspect did not actually need checking. He looked at my face. He was quiet for a moment. "Everything all right?" he said. "Fine," I said. He looked at me the way people look at you when they know fine is doing a very large amount of work. "The Hareth vine is doing well," he said finally. "Yes," I said, "it is." He nodded, asked the coupling a few polite questions, and left. I stayed until the end of the light cycle, writing notes, and did not think about the fact that the station's security system had cameras in the annex. I should have thought about that. The summons came at the start of the next day's first shift, delivered by a cooperative administrative drone that hovered outside my door with the specific energy of something that has been told to be polite, but is also not leaving. It was a formal request to appear before the station commander at 900 hours. The language in the notification was careful, not a disciplinary summons, the drone clarified when I asked, but a clarification meeting. Those 2 words were doing considerable work. I put on a clean uniform, clipped on my lime green badge, and picked up my sample case out of habit, then put it back down, then picked it up again. I was not going to leave it unsupervised. The commander's office was in the station's central hub, the only section with a full viewport on all sides, which I suspected was either a design choice intended to inspire perspective or an accident of structural engineering that someone had decided to reframe. The office itself was large and spare, the way spaces belonging to people with real authority tend to be spare, because those people do not need their rooms to make arguments on their behalf. Station Commander Vrethel was the oldest Vreth I had seen on the station. The plating across his shoulders had the particular density of something that had been tested and reinforced over time rather than designed that way from the start. He was standing when I entered, not sitting, which I registered without deciding what to register it as. There was a screen on the wall behind him. The screen was paused on a frame I recognized. The annex, 6:13 hours, me in the doorway with my sample case. "Dr. Vasanthakumar," he said. His standard was excellent, the kind that comes from decades of practice. "Please sit." I sat. I put the sample case on the floor beside my chair. He looked at the case for a moment. Something moved across his expression that I could not read. "I have reviewed the annex footage," he said, 3 times. He moved to the desk but did not sit. "I have also had it reviewed by 2 of my senior training officers who have filed formal assessments." He looked at me. "Would you like to know what those assessments said?" "If it is relevant," I said. "They used the word efficient." He paused. "One of them used the phrase structurally solved. I was not certain what that meant, so I asked, and he explained that you treated 4 active military cadets the way an engineer treats a load-bearing problem." He let that sit for a moment. He meant it as a technical observation. I am choosing to also take it as the most alarming thing I have heard in 11 years of running this station. I looked at my hands, steady, as they always were. "I was protecting my specimens," I said. "I understand that is how you experienced it." "That is what happened." He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that is not empty but full of something being decided. "Cadet Sevrak filed a report this morning," he said. He describes the incident as he used the phrase disorienting, not in the physical sense, in the categorical sense. He looked at me steadily. He said, and I am quoting exactly, that he did not understand the threat until the threat was over. He is trained to read pre-engagement signals. He found none. He has asked to be excused from today's assessment rotation while he recalibrates. I did not say anything. Cadet Kayeth's report was briefer, the commander continued. He wrote 4 words. I will share them with you. He glanced at the screen. She was already somewhere else. That was the full content of his analysis. Kayeth is not a cadet who uses 4 words when 2 will do, so I am taking those 4 words seriously. He moved around the desk and sat. The movement had a deliberateness to it, not stiff, but intentional. He was deciding to sit, which meant he was deciding this was a longer conversation. I want to ask you something directly, he said. And I want a direct answer, because I am tired of indirect ones and I have read enough diplomatic non-answers in my career to recognize one at range. All right, I said. Are all humans this capable, or are you exceptional? The question sat in the room. Outside the viewport, the outer ring of the station turned in its slow rotation, and the distant star that Vethka orbited was a small, steady point of light that did not care about the conversation we were having. I thought about the mining colony. I thought about Oliver, who had been moving through corridors designed for species twice his size for 3 years and could route the entire station from memory. I thought about the intake form with its tidy field labeled biological combat architecture. Commander, I said, I'm a botanist. I study things that grow in conditions that should not support growth. I study root systems that find water through solid rock. I study organisms that have survived every catastrophe their planet has thrown at them by becoming exactly what the environment required. I paused. I am not exceptional. I am what happens when you put a human being in a hard place for long enough and then act surprised when they figured out how to stay there. He was very still. That, he said quietly, is the most alarming thing you could have told me. I looked at him. Why? Because I have 412 non-combatant personnel on this station. 31 of them are human. He stood. And now I find myself wondering what each of them has learned to do with what they have. The word hung there. I did not offer anything to fill the space around it. The cadets are not filing formal complaints, he said. I advised them that the footage does not support a conduct claim against you. You were routing through a space that the official schedule showed as unoccupied. You responded to physical contact. The reporting structure cannot hold you accountable for the outcome of physics. Thank you, I said. I am not doing you a favor. I am describing facts. He looked at the badge on my collar, the lime green glow in the office light. Your classification remains non-combatant. I will not be submitting an anomaly report. The intake terminal already filed one, I said. He blinked once. Pardon. On my first day, cortisol response flagged as atypical. It filed an anomaly note, recommend further study. I kept my voice level. I assumed it was routine. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he turned to his desk terminal and typed something with the focused speed of someone who has just added a task to a list that did not have room for it. I will look into that, he said. You are dismissed, Dr. Vasanthakumar. Please use the primary corridors going forward. I will have the maintenance schedule adjusted to keep them clear during your greenhouse hours. I stood. I picked up my sample case. One more thing, the commander said, and something in his tone made me pause with my hand on the door panel. I waited. Cadet Sevrak is the most capable combatant in his cohort, he said. He has not had to recalibrate anything in 3 years of training. He was looking at the paused footage on the wall screen. He is 22 years old. He has been trained for military engagement his entire life. He has faced training opponents from 6 different species, all of them rated combatant. He paused. You were the first non-combatant he has ever encountered who required a recalibration report. I looked at the footage, my own shape in the doorway, small, lime green badge, sample case in hand. I was trying to get to the greenhouse, I said. Yes, the commander said. That is precisely what is alarming about it. I walked out into the corridor. The maintenance crew had cleared the primary route. The path to the greenhouse was open and empty, and exactly the right width for one person walking at a comfortable pace. I walked it slowly. I was thinking about roots. I was thinking about the Herath vine's morning growth response, and whether the soil pH adjustment I had made yesterday was holding. I was thinking about the 3 stress response specimens in the eastern bed, and whether the new atmospheric calibration was giving them what they needed. I was not thinking about the commander's office, or the paused footage, or Cadet Sevrak writing 4 words about recalibration. I was not thinking about what 31 humans on a station full of species that had never needed to wonder about us might represent. I was a botanist. I studied things that found water through solid rock. I went to my plants. I did not think about any of it. Except that I did. Quietly, in the back of the part of my brain that had been running its own calculations since I was 16 years old in a tunnel that did not want me to leave, I thought about all of it. And I filed it. The emergency session of the Cooperative's Regional Designation Review Board was called 6 days after the annex. I know this because Commander Vrethel told me, and he told me because I was, in his careful phrasing, required to attend as contextual reference material. I asked him what that meant. He said, "It means they want to look at you while they decide what to do about you." I said, "About me specifically or about humans?" He said, "By the end of the session, those 2 things may not be separable." The review board convened in the station's formal assembly chamber, which was on the central hub's top level, and had seats calibrated for 8 different body types, which in my experience meant they were properly comfortable for none of them. I sat in the human-designated seat, which was approximately correct, and put my sample case under the chair, and looked at the 12 representatives arranged in a curved row across from me. Commander Vrethel sat to my right in an observer capacity. Oliver, who had been asked to attend as a second human reference, sat to my left with the expression of a man who had spent 3 years believing that keeping his head down was a functional life strategy, and was now reconsidering. I had told him the night before that he did not have to come. He had said, "I know I don't have to, that's not really the point, is it?" I had thought about that for a while and decided he was right, which was very Oliver of him. The board's chair was a Vreth named Council Draveth, who had the specific quality of stillness that belongs to people who have chaired enough formal proceedings to have stopped being surprised by anything. He opened the session with a procedural statement that established the purpose of the meeting as a review of designation protocols as applied to the human species, precipitated by an incident logged at Vethka Station that had been referred upward through 3 levels of internal review before landing here. He did not use the word incident like it was a small thing. Then he gave the floor to the Vreth military advocate, whose name was Council Hekfra, and who had the kind of composed, precise energy that made you understand immediately that he was very good at what he did, and had thought about this particular argument for the entire 6 days since the referral. Hekfra stood. He was not performing. He was just presenting, which was more effective. The Cooperative's designation system is built on 2 foundational premises, he began. First, that biological architecture reliably predicts behavioral threat potential. Second, that classification accuracy ensures appropriate resource allocation, safety protocols, and operational trust. The human species was classified non-combatant under these premises 11 years ago at their point of contact. That classification was, at the time, supported by the available data. He paused. The available data was incomplete. He brought up a display, footage from the annex. I watched myself come through the door and watched what happened in the following 11 seconds and felt the same thing I had felt watching it in the commander's office. A distant, factual recognition, like reading a report about a structural event. 4 cadets, Hekfra said, top operational cohort, active training rotation, Physiological threat indices ranging from 8.4 to 8.9. Average combined response time at military standard, 0.3 seconds. He turned from the display. The non-combatant personnel in this footage covered that response window without apparent preparation, without formal combat training on record, and without, according to the subsequent behavioral report, apparent awareness of having engaged until after engagement was complete. He let that settle. "I want to be precise," he said. "My concern is not this individual. Dr. Vasanthakumar is a xenobotanist. The record shows no history of combat engagement, no formal training, no declared competencies in contact protocols. What the record shows is a person who, under the pressure of a perceived threat to her specimens, responded with a speed and spatial efficiency that our top cadets could not pre-read or counter." He paused. If this were an isolated anomaly, it would be a curious footnote. It is not an isolated anomaly. The Cooperative's Xenoanthropology Division filed a preliminary cultural assessment of the human species at point of contact 11 years ago. I am going to read from that assessment now. He looked down at his display. Human beings demonstrate unusual capacity for behavioral adaptation under adverse conditions. Unlike most combatant-designated species, whose threat potential is biologically inherent, and therefore broadly consistent across individuals, human threat potential appears to be environmentally cultivated and individually variable. Certain environmental factors, resource scarcity, physical isolation, high-pressure survival scenarios, appear to produce capability development that is not reflected in standard biological threat metrics. Recommend long-term behavioral study before finalizing non-combatant classification. He set down the display. That recommendation was filed. It was not acted upon. The classification was finalized as non-combatant based on biological metrics alone. 11 years later, humans occupy non-combatant roles across 47 cooperative stations. He looked at the board. The question before this body is not whether one human is dangerous. The question is what we do not know about the other humans we have already placed in positions of unsupervised operational access, because we assumed the label was accurate. He said. The room was quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when everyone in them is thinking rather than preparing to speak. Commander Vrethel looked at me. I looked at the floor. I was thinking about the xenoanthropology assessment, which I had not known existed, and the phrase environmentally cultivated, and the 11 days in the tunnel and the mining colony, and the particular quality of stillness that settles into you when you have spent long enough in a place that wanted you dead and come out the other side still whole. I was thinking about whether I was angry. I found the anger. It was there, familiar and useful, the clean, steady thing I had been reaching for since I was old enough to understand that being underestimated was a choice other people made and not a fact about me. I held on to it. It was better than the other thing, the thing underneath the anger, the one that knew Hekra was not entirely wrong. The board chair looked at me. Dr. Vasanthakumar, you are permitted to speak. I had not planned to speak. I had been told my role was contextual. I was reference material. I was the exhibit. Oliver shifted slightly beside me. It was not a signal. It was just the movement of a person sitting next to someone who is making a decision, but I felt it anyway. I stood. I did not use notes. I had not prepared anything. What I had were 11 years of being described by other people's frameworks, and a particular clarity that comes from having spent a significant portion of your adult life in places that required you to think straight or stop thinking. You want to reclassify us, I said. Nobody spoke. Because we do not fit the form. I looked at the board. 12 faces, most of them large, most of them belonging to species who had been dangerous since before they were born and had never had to think about what that meant. The form asks about biology, biological combat architecture. We gave you accurate answers. Humans do not have claws. We do not have venom glands. Our bones are not reinforced. Our territorial aggression wiring is, compared to most combatant species, genuinely mild. I paused. You built a form. We answered it honestly. You filed us as non-combatant and put us to work and did not ask what was in the parts of us the form did not cover. Hekfra was looking at me steadily, not hostile, interested, the look of someone who has presented an argument and is now observing the quality of the response. I grew up on a mining colony, I said. Core station. The walls were thin and the equipment was old and the tunnels rerouted without warning, and the only people who lasted more than 2 years were the ones who learned to read a space before they moved through it. Not because anyone taught them to. Because the alternative was being in the wrong place when the rock decided to move. I paused. I was in that tunnel for 11 days. The tunnel had vacuum on one side and silence on the other, and I had what I had, which was my body and whatever I had taught it. I paused. I am not exceptional. I am the median outcome of that environment. Every human on this station has an environment behind them. They learned whatever that environment required them to learn, because that is what we do, and that is not a biological trait and does not show up on your form. The room was quiet. You're afraid, I said. I understand that. Hekfra is correct that the assessment was incomplete. He is correct that you do not know what we are, not really, not in the ways that matter to this board. But the answer to that is not restriction. The answer to that is a better question. I looked at the chair. You asked humans what our biology does. You should have asked what we have done with it. I sat down. Oliver was very still beside me. I looked at him. His expression was the one he wore when the ventilation system did something unexpected, not alarmed, just recalibrating. Well, he said quietly, that was not nothing. The board deliberated for 40 minutes. I sat and looked at the viewport and thought about the greenhouse and whether I had remembered to adjust the eastern bed's humidity cycle before I was summoned this morning. I had not. I was going to need to check it. The chair called the vote. Reclassification to combatant, with restricted deployment and supervised access protocols. The vote was 4 in favor, 7 against with 1 abstention. Motion failed. Humanity remained non-combatant on all official cooperative documentation. Commander Vrethel escorted me out of the chamber afterward. He walked beside me without speaking for most of the corridor. The station hummed around us, its ordinary sounds, atmospheric processors, distant footsteps, the subsonic murmur of Drail communication somewhere in Sector B, making the session already feel like something that had happened to someone in a different time. You were not supposed to speak, he said finally. No, I said. It was more effective than anything the board's appointed representatives said. I was not trying to be effective. I was just tired of being described by a form I had not written. He was quiet for a moment. Hekfra will file a minority opinion, he said. It will go into the record. These things tend to resurface. I know. The xenoanthropology assessment will be reopened. There will be a longer study, more questions. Good, I said. I told you better questions. He stopped. I stopped with him. We were at the junction where the corridor split toward the central hub's administrative levels and toward the greenhouse route. Dr. Vasanthakumar, he said, you said you are not exceptional. You said you are the median outcome. Yes. Do you believe that? I thought about Oliver, who knew where every pipe ran on this station, and had rebuilt 2 atmospheric systems from documentation that was not supposed to exist anymore. I thought about the miners who had taught me to read a tunnel before I moved through it. I thought about the xenoanthropology assessment, environmentally cultivated, and the 47 stations and the non-combatant personnel who had been doing their jobs for 11 years in environments that had been shaping them the whole time. Yes, I said, that is exactly what I believe. He nodded, once. It was a specific kind of nod, not agreement, but the acknowledgement of a fact that is going to require significant time to fully understand. I went to the greenhouse. The eastern bed's humidity was low. I adjusted it. I checked the Herath vine. I wrote 4 pages of observation notes in careful handwriting. I ate something Oliver left outside the greenhouse door with a note that said, "You were right that the 3rd meal cycle is better. Today's was protein aggregate. You were well out of it." I did not smile, but the tight thing behind my eyes loosened slightly, which was the closest I was going to get. I found out about the internal protocol 8 months later, through a Drail logistics coordinator who communicated its contents to me in subsonic, which I had spent 4 months learning to read at a basic level, because it seemed useful, and I had time in the evenings. The protocol existed on no public database. It was flagged for senior command only, distributed to Vreth military leadership across the 9 stations where humans were now designated for deployment review. It said human, see attached protocol. The attached protocol said, do not restrict, do not provoke. And on the final line, in the kind of phrasing that only appears in documents written by people who have been genuinely surprised by something, do not, under any circumstances, make them feel their specimens are in danger. I read the subsonic summary 3 times. I went back to the eastern bed. The Herath vine had extended 4 new growth nodes since morning. The low-pressure specimens in the corner bed had stopped showing stress responses. The soil pH in the cross-contaminated beds was, after 6 weeks of careful work, finally holding at the correct level. I sat on my work stool. I put my hands on the bench. I decided that was probably fine. Probably. I went back to my notes, and the plants grew on around me, quietly, the way things grow when you give them what they need and stop making assumptions about what they cannot do.